Hello, my friend. A very blessed Thursday, January 24th, 2025, to you and to yours. I pray that this finds you well from wherever and whenever you're tuning in. And welcome to part 3 of Servant Leadership. And today we will be talking about portraits of a God leader. Portraits of a God leader. But real quick, let's do a recap. In part 1, we talked of God as the ultimate leader. He's the one whose leadership was not delegated to him. He is self-existent, he is self-eternal, he is self-determining. He is also the epitome of leadership. Why is this important? It's important because it helps us understand that any leadership we have has, number one, been delegated to us or upon us from God, and number two, that we are at our best as leaders when we are getting our cues and learning from God. Then yesterday, in part 2, we talked about you as God's leader. And I made the argument that you, because you're created in the image of God, you are born a leader. However, the seed of leadership inside you has to be developed. So yes, it is true that leaders are born, but also leaders are made through the development process. I also talked about the different spheres of leadership that you and I have been given, the chiefmost being leadership over our own lives. Self-leadership is the highest form of leadership, and it's when we get that down, it's a prerequisite for being effective in the other spheres of life. So what are the other spheres of leadership? The first one is self-leadership or leadership over your life. The second one is that leadership over your assignment. God has created you on purpose, filled with purpose for a purpose, and you have leadership over your assignment. Number 3 is influence over others. To each of us is given a measure of influence. Let me tell you, leadership is not about titles. Everybody that you come into contact with, you will influence them one way or the other, and that's leadership. And then we talked about the fact that you don't do these leaderships over your life, over your assignment, and over others in terms of influence in a vacuum. You do it in your world, in the corner of your world that God has put you, the exact geographical placement God has put you, the different roles and positions that God has put you in, but also the season of life you are in. You are to exercise your leadership in the context of your world. So, in other words, and then finally, we talked about the essence of godly leadership. That number 1, it's about submission. We only have authority to the degree that we are submitted to the ultimate authority. Number 2 is integrity, that at the end of the day, we'll lead people from the core of who we are, both what they see us do publicly, but also how we lead our lives privately. That influences people, integrity. And then finally, we talked about that this leadership thing is a lifelong journey of us continuing to grow to be like God, the ultimate leader, but that God uses imperfect people. He uses us in each season of growth that we are in to still lead. So ultimately, it's about reflecting Him. And on that note, allow me to share with you one of my favorite t-shirts, another one of my favorite t-shirts. This was a gift by my good friend Jemo. But this is what it says, that I want to be so full of Christ that if a mosquito, depending on your English teacher, a mosquito bites me, it flies away singing, there is power in the blood. Right? I remember listening to Ron Carpenter, and he said, in life we are either reflecting Christ or casting a reflection on Christ. So it's my prayer for me and for you that we grow so much to be Christ-like, even in our leadership, that we are ultimately reflecting Christ. So anyway, that was a long intro. But today, in part 3, we're going to talk about portraits of a leader. Now, by this, I don't mean the many hats that we wear as leaders or the many roles that we have as leaders. For example, I am a husband, I am a father, I am a worship leader at my church, I own my own business, I lead Worshippers United. There are many hats that I wear, or many roles or many positions of leadership that I have. But today I want to talk about what are the portraits, what are the different faces that you and I have or are to have as a godly leader. And you will see how these faces of leadership or portraits of leadership show up even in the different hats, in the different roles, in the different spheres of leadership that we talked about yesterday. So this was inspired in me by a book I read many years ago, Profiles of a Leader by Judson Cornwall. Amazing perspective on godly leadership. And so what I'm going to share with you is just a synopsis of the main idea of the book. And then I'll go ahead to just show how it ties in with what we've been speaking about. So in that book, Profiles of a Leader, Judson basically says that God refers to his leadership, or he shows a model of leadership in a fourfold manner. A fourfold manner. And that if you look from the story of Moses, the tabernacle in the wilderness, all the way to the end of the Bible, you see this fourfold leadership ministry exemplified. So first of all, right in the wilderness, God led the people. Moses was the head leader. Aaron was the high priest. Under Aaron were Levites or other priests. And then there were the elders. A fourfold leadership model. When the Israelites were moving in the desert, when they would settle down to camp, they would camp in four divisions, or rather in four areas. In other words, there would be four main tribes that would erect their banner in each of the four directions of the earth. So one tribe would face north, another one south, another one east, another one west. And then because there were 12 tribes total, so in each direction there would be 3 tribes, right? 3 times 4 is 12. But then with the main tribe erecting its banner in that direction of the earth. Then Judson continues also to show this same picture of leadership in heavenly leadership. And he gives the account of Ezekiel, found in Ezekiel chapter 1 and verses 10. At this point, Ezekiel is a prophet of God, but he is in exile together with the people of God. And he's chilling at a river called Kebar, and he sees a vision. And in his vision, he sees what he describes as 4 living creatures. These living creatures are identified as cherubims, right? But there were 4, again, you see the fourfold leadership model here, because cherubims, or these 4 living creatures, are angels. Angels and cherubims are one of the highest, if not the 7 highest, if not the highest level of angels. There are 7 levels of angels, but that's a story for another day. And these are God's heavenly leaders. But again, we see Ezekiel seeing 4 living creatures, 4 cherubs, and these 4 living creatures had 4 faces. Each of them had 4 faces. The first one was the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of a man. And these, by the way, are the 4 portraits or profiles that we're going to be looking at. Fast forward to the New Testament, and we're going to go all the way to the end. John is in exile, surprisingly again, but this time he's on the Isle of Patmos, and he sees a vision of heaven. And the whole book of Revelation is about the vision that God saw. And John in Revelations 4, 6, and 7 sees these living creatures again. But because John was only seeing them from a stationary perspective, he only saw the side of the faces that was facing him. And again, he saw one having the face of an eagle, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, the face of a man. Judson Cornwall continues to also show this fourfold picture in the Gospels. Think about it. God gave us four perspectives about the life of Jesus here on earth, the four Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew was written primarily to the Jews, and it depicts Jesus as the Messiah King, the picture of a lion, authority. In the book of Mark lists a lot of Jesus' miracles. It's about Jesus working, doing things, meeting needs, healing people, providing food to the masses. Jesus is a worker, is depicted as a worker in Mark. That's the face of a servant. That's the face of an ox. In the book of Luke, Jesus is referred to a lot as the Son of Man. It's in the book of Luke that Luke depicts Jesus as a man of sorrows. In other words, in the book of Luke, Jesus' manhood, or the face of a man, is really, really highlighted. And it's not until, or rather, the book of John is the one that really, really, really hits on Jesus' divinity. He's referred to in the book of John as the Son of God more times than in any of the other Gospels. That is the picture of an eagle. Okay? All right. One more for you, and stick with me, because understanding these foundations is really the key to understanding where we are going with this topic today of the portraits or the faces of a leader, and we will see how these translate into our own lives. Finally, in his book, Judson Cornwall talks about God's fourfold leadership. God's fourfold ministry of leadership, and this is found in the book of Ephesians. Now, in the book of Ephesians, and for those of you that are familiar with, you've been in Christianity for a while, we refer to this as the fivefold ministry. And in Ephesians, it reads that God has given some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, and some to be pastors and teachers. And that's why it's typically referred to as the fivefold ministry. But in the original Greek, the pastor and teacher are combined. It's one role. And actually, if you read, I think it's in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verses 24, it talks about that one of the requirements of somebody being a pastor is that they have also to have the capacity and ability to teach. So it is technically fourfold, a fourfold ministry. And what does this have to do with the price of bread? The apostle represents the lion, right? That authority. He's the one who roars the voice of God. Apostles basically create paths where there are no paths. They go into uncharted territories. It's a picture of a lion. A prophet, on the other hand, and sometimes you and I are a little wary of prophets, they tend to operate in the ethereal, right? And, kind of lifted away from the reality of the earth. That's the picture of an eagle. The evangelist, on the other hand, is the ox. They're the ones who are out there tilling the land, bringing in the harvest. They're doing the work. And if you look at the role of a pastor and teacher, isn't that the face of a man? Because the pastor is the one is on the ground, boots on the ground, dealing and deeply involved with men and women, ministering to them, serving them at their level, coming down to their level, feeling their pain, crying with them, being vulnerable and open with them. The pastor is the one that does life with the brother and sister on the ground. That's the face of a man. So, let's look at how this applies to us now that we've laid that foundation. We see Jesus and God showing up in each of these ways, relating with us from a place of divinity, the ego, relating to us as a lion from a place of authority. At the end of the day, he is God. But he also related with us at the point of a man. He became a man, right? He became one of us, felt our pain, walked with us. But also as the ox, as the worker, God as the leader, does the work, right? He takes responsibility. So we too, because we are God's leader and because our authority and leadership has been given to us by the ultimate leader, and because he is the epitome of leadership, you and I are to take our cues from him. What Judson Cornwall suggests, and what I want to suggest to you, is that we too have these 4, he calls them profiles. Today I'm calling them portraits or faces of a leader. Let's talk about you as God's leader putting on your game face as the eagle God has called you. Think of an eagle. An eagle always soars. This talks about having vision, right? An eagle is able to soar above the clouds, above the storm, and have a vision and a perspective that transcends whatever is happening down here. Soaring has that connotation of being in touch with the heavenlies, right? And so you and I as God's leader are to be so in touch, so in tune with God, so our ears so attuned to his voice that we get our marching orders from him, that we hear the vision that he is putting in our hearts, the dreams, the plans for us to achieve, right? So as a leader, you got to be a step ahead of the game. You got to soar. If you're leading people, you got to hear from the Lord. You got to soar. You got to be above them. Then not just that, as an eagle and the one through whom God's vision is being passed, you have to be able to communicate the vision clearly, in such a way that people can understand it, in such a way that you can understand it if it's a vision over your life. Scripture tells us to write down the vision, make it plain. But you also have to be able to, if you're leading others, to involve others in shaping the vision. What do I mean? They are the core elements of the vision that are non-negotiable, and you should identify that, and there's no compromising on those. But then what are the elements of how the vision is going to maybe come to pass and be shaped that you can involve others? Because I've come to learn that in leadership, when others have a sense of ownership, they participate more. So let's look at the 3 spheres of influence we discussed about yesterday. In your own life, how can you be an eagle setting a vision for where you want your life to go? In the assignment God has given you, have you clarified that? Do you have a vision put down? If you lead others, whether it's in your family as a parent, or maybe you're the oldest of siblings and others look to you, maybe you have a formal title in the marketplace or in the community, are you setting forth the vision clearly? Are you putting your game face of an eagle on? That's number 1. Number 2, let's look at the game face of the lion, right? The eagle talks of authority. The eagle talks of vision. The lion speaks of authority. And in authority, I want to share that this is a commitment to the vision. In other words, that you're not going to fall away from the core truth of the vision, is having integrity to the vision, is having the authority to see the vision through, no matter the challenges and no matter the obstacles that you're going to face. Being a lion means not playing the blame game and playing victim, but taking responsibility to see the vision all the way through and understanding, like the late President Harry Truman said, the buck stops with you. I think it was Harry Truman too who said, if you cannot stand the fire, get out of the kitchen. This is about strength. It's about having the fortitude to say, I have heard from God. God has put a dream in my heart. God has given me people to shepherd. I will see these people through all the way to the promised land. I will see the vision God has put in me all the way through to the promised land, taking authority. So let's look at the spheres of life. How are you taking authority in the sphere of leadership over your own life and the outcomes that you want to bring out of your life? Over the assignment that God has given you, your unique purpose in this world, how are you taking authority in that? In the people that God has given you to shepherd, how are you being that strong leader under whose leadership everyone else can feel secure and they know that you know what you're doing and you know where you're taking them, right? Okay, let's move right on. There are many other things that could be said there, but I'll resist the temptation. Let's look at you putting on the game face of a man. And this has to do with relatability. Listen, when God took responsibility as a lion, when he created the world, but when we fell from grace in redeeming us, he took responsibility to fix the situation as a lion. But guess what? He showed up as a man. Emmanuel, God with us. He came down to our level. So, showing up as a man, he came down to our level. So, showing up as a man means, yes, delegating. Maybe as a lion, you delegate, but you also work alongside your people, right? Showing up as a man means bearing the burdens of others that you are called to lead. Having empathy for where they are, you're coming down to their level. Relatability, dealing with conflict resolution, finding out where are the ions that are sharpening each other, also ultimately clonking into each other and fixing those conflicts. Showing up as a man also has to do with showing up authentically, showing up in your personality. The funny thing, somebody said something that I'd never thought about. He said, do you know that when the prophet Jeremiah spoke, he sounded like Jeremiah? Do you realize that when the prophet Isaiah spoke, he sounded like Isaiah? They didn't have a deep voice all of a sudden, thou saith the Lord, thou shalt. No, when they were speaking what God told them, they sounded just like them. And maybe that's the reason why people didn't take them seriously. But there's got to be an element where you and I show up as leaders authentically with who we are, comfortable in our own skin, in our own personality. As you lead people, you don't need to put on a front or put on an air. Just be you. Another aspect of showing up as a man, especially in the context of the people you lead, is vulnerability. Vulnerability. Yesterday I shared how God uses imperfect people. David was such a key example of somebody who was very, very deeply flawed, but God called him a man after his own heart. Somebody who God trusted to be not just a shepherd of sheep, but to become a shepherd of the people. God uses imperfect people. Forget David. I am very, very flawed. I'm humbled that God still decides to use me. But today in this world of leadership, and sadly, whether it's in the celebrity world or even in the church world, or leaders show up with this look of perfection. If you look at the portrait of the celebrity, they look like they have it all together. They're living the glamour life. And sometimes as leaders, we show up as these people who have it all together, and we forget to show people that we too are wounded. We too have scars. We are not perfect, right? And as such, we put a burden on our people to show up perfectly. That people are not open enough to come and say, I'm struggling, because they don't see us communicating that essence of struggle in ourselves. So showing up as a man also and being relatable has also to do with showing up vulnerably. So my friends, back again to the spheres of leadership. How are you showing up in a relatable way in your own life, being yourself authentically? In the assignment that God has given you, right? Your unique purpose. How are you showing up authentically as the man that you are for the people that God has given you to lead in your home, right? In the church, in the community, in the marketplace? How are you showing up, not as this ego who's always up in the heavens that your feet never touch the ground, not as just the lion with this place of authoritativeness, but you're also showing up as one of the pack, one of them, and hanging out with the people. You're becoming Emmanuel. You're becoming God's hands and feet, right, in the lives of the people that you lead where it matters. All right. Then finally, let's look at the last face. The last game face is that of the ox. Listen, God leads by example. And as an ox, this simply just means you gotta do the work. I was thinking about my Kansas City Chiefs. team, 4-time Super Bowl champions, 3 of those won in the last 5 years, and looking forward to a three-peat, which I have faith we will pull off. But if you hear them talking about their leaders, they talk about Andy as being the guy who's always first at Arrowhead and last to leave. When his players, he's the head honcho, but when his players show up, they find him, he was already there hours ahead, and he's the last one to leave. When you hear the other players talk about their team leader, the quarterback, Mahomes, they say he works the hardest. Travis Kelce, you hear them saying they work the hardest. As a leader, if you are leading people, okay, first of all, in your own life, you got to be putting in the work. Over your own assignment, you got to put in the work. If you're leading people, people have to see you leading by example and working hard. Remember earlier I said that God took responsibility as a lion, but yet he showed up as a man, and he also showed up as a lamb. He showed up as the servant. He showed up as the servant, the one who did the most work, the one who washed feet, the one who taught people, the one who led by his life example, and ultimately the one who gave his life as a lamb on the cross. He showed up as an ox. Again, the buck stops with you. You gotta put your nose down to the grind and do the work, right? So, my friend, how will that look like in your life? Are you doing the work to get the outcomes that you desire, to direct your life in the direction you want to go? In your assignment, are you putting in the work? You see, a dream without action is just a wish, right? You got to put in the work. In your leading of others, are they seeing you put in the work? Are you showing up with the game face of an ox? So, my friends, let's finish this thing. Thank you for hanging with me all this time. I pray that you have found some insight, some perspective, something that has enriched your perspective as you continue on your journey of becoming the godlike leader that God is calling you to be. So, quick recap: God is the ultimate leader, and you are one of his leaders. He's delegated his leadership at portraits, profiles, faces of you and I as God's leaders, right? And so, finally, just in the context of your world, right? I said the spheres of influence that God has given us is over our own lives, number one. Number two is over our assignments. Number three is over the people that God has given us to lead. But we don't do that in a vacuum. We do that in the context of the world, the corner of the world that God has put us in, whether that's geographical positioning, whether that's in terms of the roles and positions, whether that's in terms of the season of life that you are currently in. How will you show up as that eagle, that visionary, right? That hears from God and sets forth a clear path, a clear goal, a clear target to hit that your life can rally around and that people can rally around. How can you show up in the context of your world as a lion taking authority to stay true to the vision and to see it through, to shepherd the people that God has given you, so that they feel secure under your leadership? How can you show up in your world as with the face of the man, authentically, relatably, being who you are, comfortable in your skin? And finally, how can you show up as the ox, right? Allow me in this case to substitute ox for donkey. Donkey has a 3-letter name as well, ASS. How do you get off your behind and just put your nose to the grind and do the work? At some point, the rubber has to hit the road. The vision has to be implemented. How can you be the one that works the hardest, that stays up the longest, that leads by example as an ox doing the work? So that's it, my friend. Those are the portraits, the faces of a leader, of a godly leader. I pray that you will start to see those faces in you and to see how to put on those faces in the various roles and in the various spheres of leadership that you show up in. So tomorrow, we will close this thing down. In part 4, we are going to talk about delegating leadership, delegating authority to others. In other words, that God has, you see perpetuation in God's economy, right? God is about delegating. He's about multiplying ourselves and multiplying what is there. He's about us spreading our influence beyond ourselves and long after we are gone. He's about handing over the baton. And so you and I cannot be godly leaders unless we also learn how to, as somebody said, from the moment you are appointed to a position, you need to be finding your replacement. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Until then, have a wonderful, wonderful Friday, and God bless.